Hello, world. Welcome to another episode of After the Break. I am, of course, your host, Jay Paul, from the window to the wall. Hey, man, here with another special guest. She is a social worker who has worked in public health and child welfare for over 25 years. She's also the author. Her book presents the results of a study examining how religious beliefs and church-based relationships influence parental attitudes and efficiency around sex education. Here with us today on After the Break to discuss the African American parent rethinking sexual health communication, Dr. Jenny Reed.
Good morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Your research being done in line with religion is pretty interesting. And I think that's a topic that our audience really need to have and really need to hear. And I want to encourage everyone out there to also support this literature and get this book, because it actually gave me insight on a few things that made me check myself as well.
Okay.
So your study, you did a case study with 19 families, evangelical Christians. So let's dive right into this. How did that go? How did the conversation start? And let's talk about the results.
Okay. Well, to start with, I did this study in 2019. I completed it in 2021. And what brought me to the interest in this particular study was the fact of my career, where I had was mostly involved with African American parents, either in child welfare or the health department. And most of the time I was dealing with highly religious parents. Mostly in the health department, I was dealing with teens who were sometimes as young as 13 up to 18 or 19 years old. Many of them working on their second pregnancy. And so I wanted to understand why this highly religious group was having such high rates of teen pregnancy outside of marital relationships. And so that's what brought me to the study, the interest in the study. But I wanted to talk to the parents. And so that's what caused me to develop the study. I looked at parents who were between 32 and 51 years of age. I wanted parents who identified as highly religious. And the way I defined highly religious was if a person attends church at least twice a week, that tends to be a person that is considered to be highly religious. In this particular case, I looked at evangelical Christians. That designation basically means that that religious group tends to be highly conservative as well as religious. So we had a dual thing. So I wanted to see what was the conversations that were being held between the parents and their children about sex education because of the observance of the high rates of teen pregnancy, which exist overall. African Americans have the highest rate overall of teen pregnancy, as well as STDs, but the study focused more so on the communication about sex education in general. So that's what brought me to this study.
One thing I noticed in your book as well, it talked about how the community or the parents sometimes feel that it's a communal effort to educate. How important do you think that is, and what did you suggest that?
So in my study, I absolutely did not make any suggestions. This was all information that came from the participants. They were not guided in any way. I simply asked them the questions and they provided the answers. In regards to one of the questions, it was that I asked in the focus group was, whose responsibility is it to provide sex education to your children or our children? And all of the parents agreed that it is, first of all, the parents' responsibility. That was a consensus. So what was nuanced about the answer was that some parents felt that there should be some community input. For instance, they felt like the schools should have a level of involvement in the sex education of their children. However, they wanted to be suggested that it should be monitored and that the parents should have input. Other parents felt that the school should not be involved at all. There were also some indicators that some consideration needed to be taken for children who may not be in a household where they were receiving any sex education whatsoever from parents or whoever was their caretaker. So those parents suggested that there needed to be some level of community involvement. And this may also include the church, or it may also include community organizations that may be run by social workers specifically.
In my opinion, that can be a pretty scary thing, because it's something you also mentioned was the influence of the peers, but also entertainment. And speaking from that myself personally, that's one of the ways I learned from my peers and also entertainment. And I was misinformed. Talking to your peers, you're going to get wrong information. So how influential have you noticed that's been throughout your work?
Well, speaking specifically from the study, we talked about the influences of social media, technology, and children receiving information. And the participants were very clear that they understood that this is not the source that they wanted their children to receive information in regards to this very sensitive and important topic. However, if the parents indicated that they understood if they did not step in, that this would be their children's source, and this source would not be accurate, and it would be tainted by uninformed information, uninformed persons, either other young students, young children, or just people with their own just opinions about things. So they felt that this was not good, and they needed to interrupt that, and if they did use technology, that it should be their choice to use it and to find the good ways to use the technology, and not leave it to their children to simply find the information on their own.
With your studies, I noticed you mentioned a system that you use, brief sexual attitude scale. And I've actually heard adults my age have conversations about their childhood and how they came up, the openness in their communication with their parents when they were growing up. And to me, some of it sounds strange, but for them, it's normal.
The brief sexual attitude scale, that is a scale that was developed by a husband and wife team called Hendricks and Hendricks. And I use that scale to collect what we refer to as quantitative data, in which my parents went in and they did this survey, and they were rated in 4 areas, those areas that you named off. Permissiveness, which is how liberal or how conservative you are in your views surrounding sex in general, sex education, just an attitude overall around sex, okay? Also birth control. What is your attitude about the use of birth control? And it can be whether it's in a teen or even in adults. That part does not matter. But what is your view of the use of birth control? In this case, I was looking to understand what maybe the parents felt about introducing birth control to their children. As part of the educational process. And then there was communion. Communion means basically the relationship that goes into sexual behavior. So there's a relationship that forms no matter what, whether you know the person, whether you don't know the person, whether it's fly by night, one night stand, whether it's long standing, whether it's married. non-marital, it doesn't matter. There's a relationship element that goes into that. So that piece was also looked at. The instrumentality basically means exactly that. What are the instruments that are used to carry out sexual behaviors? And so I looked at those scales and the results of those scales. And there was definitely a close tie between those parents who were a little more liberal or permissive in relationship to birth control, how they scaled out in that. Those parents tended to be a little more leaning towards introducing birth control as part of their sex education of their children. Those parents who tended towards the relationship piece looked more on the communion piece, looked more towards instrumentality. And they were no relationship. There should not be any intersection between you and any other person if no relationship exists. So that's the difference between those persons with that communion and those persons that were a little more permissive. And that does not mean that they wanted their children to just have just frivolous sexual behaviors. That's
Right.
not the indicator. It's just that they were a little more open to conversations about sex surrounding birth control and not holding their children to whether or not those children had to be in a relationship, especially a marital relationship, which with this group of participants is highly important.
Do you think that those more liberal parents or those that were more open for those conversations were simply just being honest to accept the fact that they were once teens, they were once in their children's position, so they understood enough to say, hey, I can't hide it from my child because it is a part of just life, period. It's a part of our growth process as adults, as human beings, and this is a part of the process. So was that one of the things that made them kind of lower their guards?
Well, I will answer that question very carefully in that I would assume that all of my participants were as honest with me as they needed to be, and that I believe that it's just many things could impact why a parent is more permissive, less permissive, or more conservative or less conservative, and how they tend towards certain things. So personally, I don't draw an opinion on that. But what the study indicated was that those parents who tended to grow up in homes where their parents were more permissive or their parents were more open about sexual behavior, those parents tended towards the permissiveness. Those of my parents and in the study who indicated that they grew up in more strict homes, more conservative homes, were less likely to be permissive in their responses or in their beliefs towards sex and sex education.
The parental responsibility, understanding that, hey, I have a job and me and my spouse, we're away from the home, at certain times of the day, because we have to work and do these things to provide for the home, or does environment play a part? And so I wonder if those things are factors in those conversations and being real and separating the religious aspect from it.
Well, in fact, one of the research questions asked, how can parental peer relationships within religious organizations impact parental self-efficacy? And so to answer that question, there were several of my participants who indicated that they, in fact, shared space with other parents to allow them to help educate their children. And they basically shared the responsibility between couples to help educate each other. Perhaps there was a couple that was a little more comfortable with sharing on a certain subject. They would allow their children to be influenced by their couple. And also they would work as well with other couples to help educate their children, but always with the permission of the couples. Okay, so they held a shared responsibility. These were people that were in communion with each other as church members. So these were their support systems. So they saw it as a communal type of responsibility that they bear to help in case. There was one conversation in the focus group where one of my particular participants indicated that she had been very disappointed in her religious organization because she had asked for help and assistance with her child who was male, and she did not really know how to approach him in trying to educate him. He was starting to ask questions that she was not comfortable with answering, and she sought the help of her church, and they promised help, but the help never came. And so, of course, she had to, of course, herself step in. So she did not have that support from that organization, which she depended heavily upon.
Along with the conversation of sex, it's not simply intercourse, but it's also sexual preference, which is another thing that I didn't consider that I read in this book. And that's a part of the conversation I didn't think about.
Yes, one of the theories that I used heavily, depended on in this study, was Albert Bandura's self-efficacy theory. He wrote that he developed that theory in 1994. And basically what the theory of self-efficacy indicates is what lies between a person's ability to exceed or fail at a particular task. And it doesn't matter what that task is. It could be you seeing yourself as a host, as a YouTube host, right? Whether or not you exceed, what is your level of feeling of confidence? Where did that confidence develop? How did it develop? What influenced it? And so self-efficacy was something that I gleaned for in my study of parents. Most of my parents indicated that they did not feel confident in talking to their children about sex education, okay, or any aspect of it. Those parents were usually parents who had a child who was a different sex than they, like the mother that I just mentioned, and she had a son. She didn't have any daughters. And so the parents that had daughters, mostly mothers were in the study. And those mothers indicated that they felt more comfortable with talking to their daughters. There was a mixture of parents who had both. And so those parents indicated that they felt more comfortable and more confident in speaking to the child that shared the same sex as they did. Okay. And so that's where really the confidence came from, was the alignment with the same gender. Okay, as well as whether or not they themselves received sex education from their parents. Okay, as well as how they had grown just personally in their own ideas, irregardless of their religious backgrounds or beliefs. So, but those parents who did not have parents that gave them sex education within their homes, those parents indicated that they did not feel confident. Those parents who had children who were gender different from them did not feel comfortable talking to them. And in my study, it indicates that for the African American community, it's mostly the women or the mothers who are providing the sex education. There's several articles, and if you read my entire dissertation, which is very lengthy, there's studies there that show that, unfortunately, in the African American home, the males are absent in that conversation. Whether it is a married couple or not, it still tends to be the woman who is providing that education for their children. And so if they're boys, that mother is going to tend to not be as confident in speaking to her sons as opposed to her speaking to her daughters.
Which brings me to another question in regards to your work. I noticed that you also interviewed through your work children in the welfare system, foster parents, abused children, alleged perpetrators, pregnant teens, and young mothers. So, me understanding that aspect of your work, it would make a lot of sense to me why a female would probably have those conversations a lot more often than men. I've experienced more women have gone through those things more, so I can understand why a woman would be more catering to that conversation. So is that the case?
In regards to maybe why there is less male involvement in the conversation of sex education,
Yes.
Actually, no. Those are really not the indicators. The indicators in other studies is that males are even less comfortable. The studies that I used in my study indicated a number of things. Number one, males tend to be less educated by their fathers. Okay, so they tend to receive less sex education than do girls. So they don't really have the comfort level that the mothers have. However, the mothers tend not to have the luxury, whether they're comfortable or not comfortable. The job has to get done somehow. And so they have to do it, even pushing through their level of discomfort. The studies also indicated that one particular study that I can remember talked about how males tend to shy away from the conversation because of guilt of their own behaviors as teenagers or as young adults. And so they feel a little guilty. Even though at this point you're a father, no matter what your behaviors were, that's still a responsibility. But because they feel a little bit guilty, they don't want to basically hold, especially their sons, accountable to something that they were not held accountable to and maybe did not behave the best. However, again, that was then, they were children, they made their choices, but now you're a father. So, but that was one of the things that kept them away from that conversation. In regards to why some of the other males that indicators of pastors in churches and why they don't have these conversations or programs within their churches is because they don't know what to say. They don't have the words. There's a study in the dissertation that talks about where maybe over 200 pastors in the state of Texas were interviewed, and the name of the study is Give Us the Words. And they said, we don't talk about it because we don't know what to say. We don't have the words, okay? And the only words that they do have are the scriptures, which forbid sexual behavior outside of marriage. So one of the things that my participants indicated was that we've got to educate our children, because what if they don't adhere to our strict moral code? Do we leave them unprepared, or do we prepare them for a part of life that is they are surely going to face sooner than later, more than likely?
And I do believe that that preparation is important because when I look at did my research and looked at the numbers, when it, not only just STDs but HIV, it's in the mid 20s to the early 30s, and so teens going into the early stages of life, it's important that they are educated about the precautionary measures to take, whether it's abstinence or whether it's just protection in general. I think that it is an important conversation, very important conversation, because
Very important.
I also heard a study that the younger generation, they aren't as active as prior generations, and so I don't know if that's a good or bad thing in regards to procreation, because they don't want to have children as much as we did and the ones before us. So the conversation about around sex education is very imperative to the community, the safety of the community, and the health of the community.
If I were to suggest something, okay, I would suggest number one, get my book. Okay.
Yes.
Get my book. My book is not a how to or what to say book, but what it does do is it indicates and helps the parents identify areas where they can speak to their children about. One of the things that the study indicated by the use of the brief sexual attitude scale is that there is more to sex education than letting a child know what to do with their physical body. Okay, that children need to also understand the importance of relationships. They need to see relationships. They need to see their mothers and their fathers in relationship. And J. Paul, I'm just going to throw this one in for good measure. Okay, here's the thing. If you are a mother and you're not with that child's biological father and vice versa, it's important for those children to see a healthy relationship between their parents, whether they are together or not. There seems to be this unwritten rule that if we are not together, we have to be at war. And if they see that communion part is going to be education to them. They're going to see that relationships need to be war zone. And that's going to keep them in a cycle of sexual behaviors, trying to find that one partner where they're not at war with. So you're teaching them that piece, whether or not they see it in a cooperative manner or whatever. They're seeing relationship, and that's going to be part of their sexual choices. Okay, so that's important. The book also talks about in regards to birth control. When you introduce birth control, you don't have to necessarily put a child on birth control in order to have a conversation with them about birth control. They need to learn about birth control, what it's for. Okay, they need to understand how and when to make choices, but that is going to come in a lot of different phases. In my book, the participants talk about what's soon enough, what's too late. One thing that they agree about: if your child is 13, African American, the literature surrounding African American teens is that our girls tend to be sexually active as soon as the age of 13, given biological changes in their body, as opposed to of their white counterparts and even Hispanic counterparts. Okay, so biology plays a part in it as well.
Wow.
And so if you're just starting these conversations at 13, you're already behind the 8 ball. You're already too late. They've already seen the videos on TikTok, Instagram, and all the other platforms that I can't even name. They've already gotten the videos from their friends at school. They're getting those as early as 3rd grade. There are conversations going on as early as 8 years old, be out on the playground. Okay. So the book talks about what's the earliest. One parent indicated that as early as language, and you begin to speak to your children, not about instrumentality, but just the sacredness of their bodies, learning what their bodies are, how sacred they are, how important they are to their health, as you said, how important they will be to them in relationships, that if what parent maybe would not want their children to wait until they're married to be sexually active. What's the reality of that today? I don't know that it's highly real today, because a lot of people don't want to marry. They may want to have children, but they may not want to marry. So what does that look like? Okay. So the book talks about a lot of that. And I think what it does is it helps people, it can help a person to identify with their own fears. Like, hey, I do feel like this. I think I see myself in these parents. And as a result, I hope it would spur them to begin to think about how to go ahead and begin the conversations with their children, because it's never too late. It may feel like it's too late, but it's not too late. Also, talk to your doctor. Take your children to the doctor, talk to your doctor, ask them about information that they would suggest, okay? And to help age appropriate. So one of the things that I say all the time is start the conversation, scale the conversation up with the maturity level and involvement of your child. Allow allow both parents to have interaction with their child on those topics so that they can get a balance. Allow that conversation and don't shield those children from those conversations with both genders.
But that's the African American parent rethinking sexual health communication. Dr. Jenny, that's great information. Everyone out there, I do believe you find great value in this book. It's some great literature. I learned some things myself. And yeah, it is a conversation that none of us should run from in order to protect our community. And it's always my opinion that everybody's child belongs to us all. And Dr. Jenny, any last words before we get out of here?
Dr. Jenny Reed, if you can remember the title, it's a little bit long, but if you type it in, it will come up. I am sure that there is a lot of use for this study. It is a one-of-a-kind study, and I definitely plan on doing some other things within the community. I don't plan on just stopping with this book. And so I'm just hoping that this book can be a change agent for our community. I would like to see the teen pregnancy rates go down in our community, as well as the STD rates go down in our community among our teens. Our teens are so highly, disproportionately impacted by these two very negative things. So I'm hoping that this will be one of the ways we can use to turn that around.
And that's the African American Parent Rethinking Sexual Health Communication by Dr. Jenny Reed. Get your copy on Amazon. I got mine. I also bought a copy for my sister too last month. And so hopefully, since you read it and you read it and you're teaching Nisi and little one too. And so thank you for your time, Dr. Jenny, and thank you for your work. Continued success and continued blessings. Till next time. Respect and salute.
Thank you for having me, J. Paul.
Thanks for being with me. We're gone.